Hey guys, Thomas the Silly Genie here, aka Mustached. I'm here to review the movie Totally Killer. If you end up enjoying this full movie review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers. Second and third to my Patreon and PayPal where you can help support me and my channel directly. And fourth to my Discord server you can join, collab, and chill and do all that cool stuff. And chilling will be reminded at the end of the review. With that out of the way, let's get into the movie Totally Killer. So this movie starts with a pretty vague narration about Halloween, or during Halloween. And we are told about what's referred to as the Sweet 16 Killer, in which the woman, or young woman, were killed at 16, in reference to the killer's, motto. 3 of them were killed in 1987, and thus, events have unfolded, and we currently jump ahead to the present timeline. We then cut to our main character, Jamie. So Jamie and her friend wants to see one of the new horror movies of their time. And the parents, or at least the mom, is very concerned because it was their friends growing up that have been murdered. So they're trying to look out for their daughter. Their daughter is at that age where she feels like she's independent and doesn't need that codependence of her parents to look out for her. So, after storming off to go see this movie, the mom, who is now left alone in the house, is attacked by a killer. Now, she is prepared for this, so we do see her fight back a little bit. Now, I don't know if time travel shenanigans were involved this earlier on in the movie, but we do see him escape towards the front of the house, and then at some point, not even too much later, attack from the back of the house. So I'm not sure what that shenanigans was, but here we are. I digress. So, he gets the advantage by taking that back attack. And indeed, the mom ends up dead at the beginning, relatively at the end of the movie, so that's not really a spoiler. Surprise, surprise. And our main character, Jamie, is distraught when she re-arrives back at home. So, after we see that, we see her talk to her principal and this other police officer about the events that unfolded, and begin to talk up with some, as we'll say, or we'll see her bump into some red flags, as we like to call them, or red herrings, more so akin to. Which, unfortunately, I do think that the red herrings, or singular red herring that they set up for the movie does unfortunately make the actual killer reveal that much more obvious. I think that they should have made the architects a little bit more subtle in terms of, like, who the potential killer could be. I feel like the other movie with the that was made by the same group, I believe, that made the the other time travel horror movie with it's like the day over and over again with the horror movie. I think that it had a very similar issue, if I recall correctly, where the killer, with a little bit of hindsight and just paying a little bit more attention, is super duper obvious. Here, I think it's even more obvious than that, though, unfortunately. Once you meet the character and once you see some of the line delivery that character has later on in the movie, but we'll get to that part later. For now, the dad has a moment with her where we get to see how he talks about how she came to be and how things used to be all cool. So all the while, she decides to stop by this theme park where she was meeting up with her friends for preparing for something or other. I forget the setup of why they were heading here, but I digress. She ends up meeting one of her friends. However, she gets attacked by the same killer. And her friend is there too, so they get split up from each other. She ends up her friend ends up calling for help, and she ends up fleeing towards, as you would have surmised by now, a time machine that the friend has been working on. Yes, that is a premise, as it were, that sets up the whole time travel in the first place. So yeah, that is what allows the rest of the movie to happen, so you just gotta have to buy that the friend knows how to build a time machine, I guess, in this instance. But it needed a knife to make it work, I guess. Anyway. So, a lot of people have pointed out that this movie mocks the idea of time travel within its context. Now, why I think that's a good thing and not a negative thing is that this movie is a comedy horror and is promoted as such. You know what movie wasn't a comedy action? The other movie that had time travel and superhero shenanigans, the Avengers, the third installment, Avengers Endgame, was it? That had time travel. That was not set up or promoted as a comedy, and they had the audacity to try to explain time travel in a stupid way. And more than once, by the way, which made it even more convoluted in that movie. Here, they only explain it twice, and they use the same analogy, essentially. They use this whole time is a river sort of analogy. It keeps moving in one direction, and traveling back in time is going upstream, and then as you move closer down, things will just trickle down. Seems to be the way they explain time travel in this instance. But what makes this movie even better is that the time travel in this movie has consequences. As the movie progresses through the killings happening differently, we see that the characters are remembering these events as they are sort of popping back into their head. So as the friend informs this journalist guy of the Mandela effect, this is, again, I think, more in service of a great way to use time travel, not a hindrance. So I'm going to oppose every reviewer who said the time travel in this movie is shenanigans worthy. That would actually, for me, be more praise, even though I think that the time travel in this movie is a lot smarter than any critic, I think, gives this movie credit for. I think the time travel in this movie is relatively smart. Surprisingly so. And I think it's because so many people have seen so many other time travel movies in accordance or predisposed to them. Like Avengers Endgame, and then there's that other one that wasn't even that old, or had traveling between, the whole multiverse thing of Doctor Strange and all that stuff. You know, consequences be damned in that scenario, you know. But I digress. Time travel, I can definitely see how people can have gotten on that route. However, I don't think that that has injected or infected in this movie at the slightest. I think that the writers here were very thoughtful in their ways of approaching time travel. Oh yes, I was thinking of The Flash, that movie, because it also has different universes, but also simultaneously fast travel or time travel. Anyway, so yeah, people have been souring on time travel movies because of movies like The Flash, as an example. I think that's the biggest example of a current movie that has definitely soured time travel for reviewers in general, and I think they carried over a lot of the negatives from the movie of The Flash to this movie. Because again, I think this movie handles time travel significantly better than The Flash. And I do think that one of its highest payoffs comes from time travel, and I greatly appreciate it. But we'll get to that. Anyway, as I said, we see that the killings are happening at different times, and even in some instances at different locations. So, for example, she says, like, oh, you know, you're gonna die at this party, and then they end up going to the party, but it ends up being one of the other three girls that she's trying to protect from this event. Now, when these events start to unfold, she only reveals, at least to them, that she's a psychic. She reveals to her friend's mom, who's around her age at the flashback point, that she is indeed a time traveler, because she was the one who initially was building this time machine, and then the daughter took over from that point on. So we have a little bit of few moving pieces here that are all working in really well conjuncture with each other. We see that when she goes back, she's taking her level of sensitivity and, you know, how modernization has ruined us. She's taking that literal attitude and injecting it back in time to, you know, when people were way more laid back, and, you know, you have the depiction of the I forget what it was. It was like a Indian like sports team, but it had like the very I guess the poor depiction of it, so she would call that racist, as you know, as that be. And again, she's very appalled by the level of aggression in the sports. This is very early on, before anyone's even attacked. So this is all set up before she meets the three women or girls rather, that she's trying to protect in the flashback at the very most. So yeah. We see that again. We have our janitor, who is masquerading as our very obvious, like, you know, he's the killer, quote unquote, kind of vibe going on. But I digress. We see that among the three, Tiff, I wrote their names down, by the way, because I was actually getting invested in this story, is the first of the three attacked in her bed. This is not where she was killed, it's a different location. The killer makes his exit. Again, implied time travel, question mark. And again, this is where she states she's a psychic rather than from the future. And she even further develops that by saying she can only look up to a certain point in time, her current timeline, that being 2023. Very convenient move, and I smirked a bit at that one. I thought that was a bit of an obvious joke too, on top of it being just true. Sometimes true statements can also simultaneously be used as jokes, and I do appreciate the level of attitude in the delivery to make it appear as a joke simultaneously as it well being a fact. So she's trying to consistently warn the others, but they are not doing a good job of paying attention. And again, as the events of the first killing unfold, the memories shift. The pictures, we actually see the pictures changing, the stories, the headlines changing. We see the consequences of the time travel having their effects in the framework of where they would be, having their effects. If a story broke out in New York, and then you had a time travel event that took place in New York, this movie seems to be implying that framework, that particular story, would be remained in New York. Now, let's go with an obvious caveat example, that being something extreme like 9/11. Let's say time travel happened and then that prevented 9/11 from happening. That would have, because 9/11 affected America as a whole. That's how big 9/11 was as a event in our timeline of history. That would probably significantly change the outlook of a lot of the things that have transpired since 9/11. Whereas, again, smaller events, smaller stories, such as these one-off murders, or in these little small rural towns, would be condensed within the context of these towns. So I think this movie is appropriate to its framework of time travel in that way. So after their second outing in this cabin, they have this party. She's trying to, again, be the protective one here. It does not go well. They actually do fend off the killer a little bit here, but they keep getting separated. And the killer does eventually get their claimed victim, their second one now. And with the scuffle, though, she collected blood and DNA samples. Now, I didn't look this up, but I really wanted to, because I didn't remember this. I know that there was a thing, and I forget when DNA actually became, like, a primary source for police. I should have looked this up. Because I'm actually a little bit, I'm enough fascinated to at least know when that happened in accordance to this movie. Because the police are like, what the hell? Like, what DNA? Like, what the fuck is that? They play it off as if they have no clue what that means, and throw it away as as what would be presented today as evidence. Or at least in tracking the killer. So yeah, definitely a very time travel based joke in terms of how far we've come in technology, in a good way, quite frankly. So that's actually making fun of the past, not the present. So I do appreciate that the movie is taking jabs at both the present and the past. It's not excluding one or the other. It's taking advantages of both time periods and being like, hey, there's a little free jab at this era. There's a little free jab at the past, I like the quid pro quo, as it were. Anyway, so apparently they need to reassert where their time machine is. They set it up in this spinny a contraption called the quantum drop. And they're using the last of the two of the remaining victims, Marissa, as bait, as the others are prepping in nearby to assault the killer. And when she goes in first, we see them hiding, and then we see the killer approaching. And they begin to attack off the killer. This is where things get really interesting, as we see the killer get stabbed in the back with one of the blades from Marissa, her scythe actually, which was actually a real scythe. They used that as a joke. And it turns out it was this guy named Doug. Now, there's a reason I didn't mention him at all up until this review. So Doug is this guy who's introduced a little bit earlier on in the context of this movie. We see him introduced as this quiet, sort of, well, not too quiet, but this sort of, he's blocked away from the party type of guy earlier on in the party event. We see that, which is like cue number one of like, oh, that's a yellow flag at least. It's like, And then we get a definite red flag, or another interesting flag of like he's in the area helping our protagonist move into the party, and we don't see him follow up at all. And then there's the red flag, where we see him talking with her later on in this parking garage, where she's like suspecting this totally different guy. I forget if it was actually the janitor himself, or just some other sus guy that she was starting to look at suspiciously. After suspecting him and, investigating his truck, she heads out, and then he's there, and then we see Doug approach, and he's there, and they begin to talk about video games. Now this dialogue is where things get really interesting, and should just be the immediate red flag in how much casually Doug is just talking about how death is just so cool in these video games. It's like the number one thing. It's like, man, it's like, oh, okay, And they don't even pay any mind to any of this stuff, by the way, because it's in the context of the video game. So I feel like that's going to be one of those unfortunate side effects, is that people are perhaps in the sway of this movie, the news people that typically hark back on to this old idea of how video games cause violence, even though that has been disproven more times than I can count at this point. Unfortunately, I think this is going to do that no favors, but hey, we're here again. Anyway, so that is what brings us to the great conclusion, or at least the greatest feeling, that he is the killer. However, once they take him out, we see that Marissa gets killed anyway by another killer, so there happens to be a second killer. So they begin chasing him, and they end up on the machine with herself, her mom, when she's young, and the killer. She eventually kicks her own mom out of the time machine, so it's just her and the killer. She eventually puts a stop to the killer, the new one, and finds out that it is the guy, the journalist, that has been, invigorated in this case all this time, and he went back because he wanted to keep it growing. He wanted sort of the Scream, maybe hearkening back to a Scream sort of vibe. He wanted to get it, to keep this thing going, keep it alive, keep it fresh in people's minds, make it a big thing. And that's like the only reason why he went through with it. So, obviously, with that being done, and him being killed in the time machine, she gets out, she's back in her current timeline, and she rushes home, and the woman that was with her, now the mom, her friend's mom, gives her a notebook of all the things that have changed, and she's like, she sees like some random, or what she assumes is some random guy, like pass her by. And this is why I didn't say anything in regards to this either. It turns out that she had learned, as I set up earlier in this review, about how their parents hooked up. And they mentioned college as the time frame in which they officially hooked up. Now, when she heads back in time, and when she starts revealing that they hook up, they decide, or the mom decides, to hook up with him significantly earlier in this time frame. And she keeps, like, trying to prevent it, like, no, you're gonna screw up the timeline even more than I'm already trying to, However, and I think this is the cleverest bit from the time travel sequence, is that since we saw them hook up earlier, when we see them later in our current timeline, we see that random guy that ends up being her older brother. She is still born in that college time frame, so time is a weather, so she's like reinserted in the same place. There just happened to be a prior spot where the parents got it on. They had a boy. That boy grew up, blah 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 blah, and then the time streams like continue to flow down, as it were. And I think that was a really nifty trick in terms of really clever time travel shenanigans / consequences / a little hint of comedy there, and I think that one definitely hit the mark too. Just in terms of like, and you catch it when she's like, oh, my name, right? And then she's like, she hears her name, and then she's like, but that's my name. And then she looks at him, and she's like, oh? And then the her friend's mom is like, oh, yeah, about that. So that's sort of where that leads off. And the movie ends with us scrapbooking with all the time changes as the credit sequences roll out. And that was the movie Totally Killer. And I must say, I think out of all the movies within this little, like, subgenre of, from the Groundhog Day rewind time travel shenanigans to this, I actually think this might be the strongest of the three, because I do recall there was another one. I actually do think currently, and I could be wrong, I would probably need to rewatch the other two, but I currently think that this is the strongest of the three. I think that they totally utilize time travel to its best advantage, where I think a lot of critics got it wrong and criticizing the time travel. I think that they utilized it to chef's kiss levels of beautiful. And again, with accordance to it being a comedy, they even leverage that to poke holes at, again, our current timeline, that timeline. They don't necessarily leave one timeline alone. They create these little jabs that are really fun. They have consequences for the time travel. She learns her ultimate lesson in seeing her mom deal with her mom, and seeing that connection and seeing how much she was like her mom at this relative to the same age. So yeah, I think that this movie pulls off a lot more than I think critics are giving it current rate their grievances for. I think this movie, again, is significantly stronger than I think a lot of reviewers are giving it credit for, which is exactly why currently, man, I'm thinking, should I give this movie a 10 out of 10? Like, I'm really on the antithesis of it, if not anything else. If anything else, I'd probably still string for a 9 out of 10, but still really, really sharp. Really, really solid writing here. If anything else, I really appreciate this movie. If you have not seen it, I would actually highly recommend it. It's really fun. It's really sharp. It really takes advantage of its time travel. It does all the things I think a movie of this caliber should do within that gimmick. So, with that being said, that is my review of Totally Killer, and if you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. Want to head over to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers, so get a third to my Patreon and PayPal, where you can help support me and my channel directly, and fourth to my Discord server you can join, collab, and chill, and do all that cool stuff. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye!